Hello, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very first module in the series in which we're going to be looking at contracting and negotiating skills for conference and meetings organisers. My name's Richard John, and I'm going to be taking you through the next 10 sessions. In this first one, what I want to do is talk about, well, as it says on the screen, why events are different. Now, they're not different in the sense that they don't follow the traditional rules of profit and loss, but there are some very unique factors that we have to address in our industry, and we use some quite unique jargon. Now, it may be that you've been in the industry a few years and you're familiar with much of these expressions and phrases. It could be that you're relatively new and you're not entirely sure what they mean. Either way, what I'm going to do just in the next 20 minutes or so is go through some of the issues that are quite unique to this wonderful industry of meetings and events. And we're going to have a look and see what they mean for you in practice. Now, why is this so important? Well, although meetings are unique in many respects, as I say, they do follow the very basic laws of business planning. And one of the things we want to look at is making sure that we're always getting the very best deal. Obviously, if you're running commercial events or even not-for-profit meetings, one of the things you want to do is minimize your expenditure, still putting on a good event, of course, and making sure that by doing so, you can maximize the return. If you're a commercial organization, you'll use words like profit. If you're a not-for-profit association, you'll still be familiar with the idea of a surplus. And what we want to do is look at every opportunity to minimize the costs involved in running events, and that might surprise you, just some of the ways those costs appear, and see how easily we can make some pretty dramatic changes to the bottom line. So, welcome on board. Let's get started. This is a bit of a different business, as I mentioned, and we do use some very, very unique jargon. And at the end of the day, we're involved in putting on meetings, conferences, effectively a bit of show business. We want to make sure that every penny we spend can really be seen by our audiences. So generally, there it is up on the screen. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't some things we need to think about. And what I want to do is just touch on some of the jargon that you may have heard about, and make sure that you're completely comfortable with it. Would you be familiar with someone telling you about an RFP? Are you sure you know what's meant by subvention? What about this DDR? How about attrition? And then mitigation. Oh, and one I'm sure you're all very familiar with, the issue of commission. So what we're going to do is look at some of these in just a little bit more detail and see what impact they might have on your event and what it means for you in terms of negotiating and contracting the very best deals. So let's start with an RFP. Very simply, this is simply a request for proposal. Now, sometimes you may see another final letter because there may, for example, be a request for quotation or a request for information. But effectively, this is the start of the tendering and negotiation process. There's an example there. It's not just unique to the meetings industry, but it's about identifying suppliers who can meet our specifications for the project that we have lined up. So an RFP could go out to a hotel. It could go out to a destination. It could go to an airline. It could go to a company providing audio-visual support. It could go to a company providing registration. What we're looking to do is draw up a short list of the companies that can help us and make sure that we have the ability to compare like with like. The last thing you want is to get into a situation where you're working with a company and you find that you haven't budgeted for many of the essential items. So a request for proposal is really the best way of shortlisting those companies whose professional abilities will match exactly what you're looking to achieve. Now, if you are involved in sending out RFPs for meetings and events, just a couple of places I thought you might like to know about. You see, our wonderful meetings and events industry is actually awash with some pretty impressive trade associations and professional bodies. And These are three you might like to talk about. They're not the only associations in the industry, but they are three of the largest. SITE is the Society of Incentive Travel Executives, and these are people who are often responsible for organising major meetings and events, taking large groups of people away on incentives and special promotional award events. These are people who have a huge amount of experience in understanding what's involved, and therefore it can be worth talking to them in terms of planning larger association and events. So you may also want to think about using their resources to send out RFPs. Then we have one of the largest association, Meeting Professionals International, MPI. Huge contingent in the States, but with chapters around the world. If you're not a member of MPI, you may want to think about it, because it's a golden opportunity to meet with like-minded people. And MPI also have the ability to help you put together appropriate RFPs, as well as sending them out to many of their members who would be delighted to hear from you. And then there's ICA, the International Congress and Convention Association. Many of their members run the largest meetings facilities and are also representing some of the many destinations around the world that are hungry for meetings and events business. These three associations would all welcome the opportunity to talk to you and assist in distributing your RFPs to their members. It's what they exist for, and it's one less job that you have to do. Now, I mentioned this word subvention, and I'd be interested to know how many of you are familiar with this. Well, I'll come back to exactly what it is in a moment, but I'm going to invite you to do a little bit of mathematics. Imagine you're the organizer of a meeting or a conference that has 500 delegates in. Now, it could be that that's chicken feed to you, or you might think, 500? Don't be ridiculous, we only have 50. But bear with me a moment. Those 500 delegates come along to a conference or a meeting that you organize, and maybe on average they stay for 3 nights. They're going to stay in pretty luxurious hotels. They're business people away from home. So each night their hotel bill is going to be $200. But these people also have to eat. They will come to your conference, but they may also have to go for meetings. They'll take taxis. They'll possibly have one meal on their own or with colleagues. They'll be going off to restaurants, maybe even to nightclubs. They'll do a little bit of shopping, and all the time they have an expense rate of, let's imagine, $100 a day. To get to your event, they have to take a flight. Now, flights can be very expensive, but let's just assume they take one that cost $500. So if you add those 3 nights and the expenses and the flight, what we're saying is that each delegate spends $1,400 coming to your event. But hang on, there's 500 of them. That's a total spend of $700,000. Now add into that the money that you're spending on the venue, and that you're also putting into registration systems and maybe people on the ground to help you. And you have a crew running around, staying in hotels, having meals, hiring taxis. Then, of course, there's all the staging, the lights, and everything else. So it would be very easy for a large event to run up a total spend of maybe $1 million. Now, imagine how grateful many cities would be for $1 million coming into their local economy. That $1 million will be spent in shops and restaurants and then be paid out in fees and wages, and that means that that money is going to stay in the local economy. So the figure that you spend and contribute to a local economy for your meeting could be far higher or it could be lower. But the point is, it's still valuable economic stimulus going into a city or a town or a region. And because of that, what you might find is that if you are an organizer, there is a subvention budget available to you from that city or town or region. A subvention budget is effectively support that the city will offer in an attempt to persuade you that there is the city that you should go to, not their neighbour down the road or on another continent. So what that means is that you need to find out if there is any subvention available. Now, this is quite a complicated area, so all I'm going to suggest is that you ask the question. Subvention is something that's worth exploring, and it's worth talking to people about. And despite the graphic there, subvention doesn't have to be in the form of cold, hard cash. You see, subvention could also be a city giving every single one of your delegates a free travel card, or a free museum pass, or offering to host a reception with the mayor. It can be a whole host of things. You just need to ask the question. There may also be some issues arising about the ability of some countries to provide subvention. Some countries, as a matter of course, do offer it. Some are a little more constrained. But ask the question, see what's available. Even, as I say, if it's not a case of being given money, if a region is providing you with something that you no longer have to pay for, then that's a very valuable saving that will appear straight away on your bottom line. So who are the best people to talk to about subvention? Well, one of the things you'll find is that in many parts of the world there are these things called CVBs, Convention and Visitor Bureau. There's a logo for the very lovely San Diego CVB. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that you should talk to San Diego about subvention more than any other CVB, but CVBs are a good place to start. So you can use search engines to find out what kind of CVB is available for the areas that you're looking at. And you give them a call, get in touch, talk to them about the events that you might be planning, and see what's available. It really is as simple as that. They'll need to know more about your event, they'll ask some questions, and then they can come back and make a suggestion. And some CVBs will be very happy to take your RFPs. Don't get too confused by all these TLAs. That's three-letter acronyms, by the way. So CVBs are the place to go if you want to talk about subvention and see what support is available in a region. Do not go to a hotel and ask them about subvention, because it's not something they get involved with. Okay, this is something that's done by regional associations, by local government. Do remember that some CVBs are paid for and financed by regional taxes, some are paid for by government, some may be private organizations. So there is no one-size-fits-all. But hey, we're talking about free resources, so if you don't ask, you don't get. And that's one of the key things to remember in negotiation. After all, they can only say no. You'll also be very familiar, I'm guessing, with the concept of a DDR. That's a day delegate rate. Now, that's fine, but just a couple of things to be wary of. Firstly, DDRs are not the same from property to property or even from country to country. You have to be very sure that you know exactly what you're getting. So when you're talking to any venue, be very clear about what is and what isn't included in a DDR. So, for example, it's quite common that many venues will quote you to settings of coffee and tea for your delegates. Well, that may be fine for you, but I need coffee on arrival and mid-morning and mid-afternoon, and probably a cup after lunch as well. Compare that to other venues that may just offer you unlimited beverages. They'll be soft, unfortunately. There won't be any alcohol involved, not unlimited. You need to check on things like water. Some venues will offer you unlimited supplies of water for all your delegates. Others will make a sort of contribution, but then start charging extra for bottles of water brought in with quite amazing markups. You need to make sure that you're paying a very clear DDR that will encompass all the food and drink that you need, because it's not uncommon for a venue to say, we'll provide this in the DDR, but if you need an extra sandwich at lunch, that's going to cost. You need to be clear about what's included in terms of AV. I can tell you as an organizer, I've been to some venues where they say, AV's included, and then you go in and find the world's most battered flip chart and a very dried up pen is the only thing that's on offer. It's not the same everywhere. So these are the things you do need to be clear of, making sure that when you're talking to one venue, it's exactly the same as another. Just wanted to mention a word you may be familiar with, which is attrition. Now, Attrition doesn't always have a consistent meaning in the industry, but effectively what happens when you work with a hotel, you'll often find that you'll be having to block book a number of rooms at a certain rate. Now, attrition can mean a couple of things. One is the rate at which you gradually let that room allocation go because you don't want to be responsible for it. However, can also mean something slightly different. And here I want you to use your imagination. Imagine it's your home. It's a Saturday night. You've decided to host a little dinner party. You have 8 friends round and you've prepared a very nice casserole, maybe beef bourguignon. And then there's a knock at the door and I've turned up. I am now the 9th person because I've heard great things about your cooking. Well, okay, that's fine, but apart from the fact you get all your guests to shuffle around and pull up another chair at the table, apart from the social embarrassment of having me gate crash your dinner party, what's the real cost involved? You see, I'm guessing you can probably stretch your beef bourguignon just for one more plate, and there'll probably still be some left over tomorrow. So we have to think in the same kind of way when we're talking to hotels, especially when it comes to catering. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about proper sit-down silver service meals, but one of the things you should be able to negotiate with a hotel is an attrition rate. This is often linked with minimum numbers. You see, hotels have to cover their costs. Let's be realistic. They have a very expensive piece of quality real estate. That incurs costs. They have to make an honest profit. They want the maximum number of people turning up for your event because that way they can charge you more. So they're going to ask for a substantial minimum number. Your job is often to negotiate on that and get that figure down as low as possible because you don't want to pay for people if they're not actually booking on your program. Okay, so that's all well and good. But what you can do is discuss with a hotel an attrition rate. So, for example, you could say, we're hoping to get 100 people along. If we get 90 people along, then we will pay for 90. And if we get 80 people along, we will pay for 80. But if we get less than 80 people along, and we were aiming for 100, we'll still pay for those 80. What we're agreeing is an attrition rate of 20%. Why would the hotel go for this? Well, it's the same as the dinner party scenario. Let's be honest, they know that catering for 80 people and catering for 100 isn't too much of a challenge. So you have to be prepared to negotiate on this. Hey, listen, if you get 90 people, then you pay for 90. Why shouldn't you? They've all turned up and they've been fed. And if you do agree that you're aiming for 100 people, you negotiate an attrition rate of 20%, and you only get 60, and then it's down to you to pay for 80 because you should have done a better job marketing, or you shouldn't have overestimated the demand for your program quite as badly. So, as with all negotiation, it's about being fair. It's about understanding the industry we work in. It's about being realistic. And although I started this session by saying that meetings are in some ways different, we have to remember that meetings also follow the same rules of business, and that includes one that is called economies of scale. So never be afraid to talk attrition. I want to talk to you about something called mitigation. Now, mitigation. To mitigate often means to minimize, to prevent. So we mitigate or minimize risks from happening. Now, that's all well and good. You may be thinking, what's the relevance for this particular program on negotiation? Well, we will be looking at this in more detail. But one of the things you need to think about is that when you're negotiating contracts and talking to hotels, one of the things you'll be doing is signing a contract which will commit you to numbers of people turning up. And one of the things you need to know is that a principle of English law, and that means in many respects law that takes place around the world, a supplier has a duty to mitigate or minimize any losses that are going to be incurred. So one of the things you need to make sure on contracts that you sign is that it's very clear that you expect suppliers to mitigate or minimize their losses. So, for example, with a hotel, you would expect the contract to state that, we will be charging you cancellation if you cancel your event after we've gone to a lot of trouble to take your booking. However, we, as a venue, will aim to mitigate or minimize your losses by trying to sell on the facilities that you are going to book to another party. And they have a legal responsibility to do that. So it's always important that you make sure that parties are looking to mitigate, to minimize their losses. And that's something we're going to come back to on future modules. Now, I also want to touch on the issue of commission. The events industry is not unique in that it pays commission in many areas. However, you'd be surprised just how widespread the payment of commission is. Now, I'm certainly not going to criticize the model because it can be very, very effective. In the meetings industry, you have a whole choice of venues that you could choose from, and you may not be familiar with all those. So there are highly professional and reputable agencies that will act as the go-between. They will find the venues for you. They will go out and do some research. They will put together reports suggesting which events and which venues would be the perfect match. They will draw up a short list and invite you to go and look at them. They do a lot of work, and often they'll do that free of charge, to you at least. All that work has to be paid for, and what happens is the venue finding agency will earn a commission from the venue, and rightly so, because they provided a service. However, you may feel confident that you don't need the help of a venue finding professional because you're very, very competent at doing that role yourself. Now, do remember that it's going to take up time, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of research, and it can be a false economy simply to say, I'm not going to use a venue finding agency. However, if you're doing the work yourself, you have to ask yourself, why would I pay commission? And of course, this issue of commission is usually kept a reasonably confidential and private matter between the venue finding agency and the hotel. Generally, commission rates run at about 8% for meeting rooms and bedrooms, but they can fluctuate quite a lot. So you might find that there's a lower commission rate on a meeting space and a higher commission rate on a bedroom. Hotels will offer different rates. They might offer different rates at different times, and they might offer different scales of commission depending on how much business a venue finding agency brings to a particular venue. So there's no cut and dried fee and no cut and dried process. But back to you. If you're listening to this and you're the person responsible for booking the venue and it's your event, then you have to ask yourself, why would you pay a commission? Because you've done all the work. Have to remember that many venues do pay the commission because it's much easier to pay a venue finding agency a commission than to employ a team of salespeople. But if you've gone to the venue directly, so you've effectively sold it to yourself, you have to think, should I pay a commission? How do you avoid this? Well, I'm going to suggest that what you do is simply master a very simple phrase. When you're talking to a venue, you've decided it's on your short list. You've decided that you think it could be the perfect fit for your meeting, and you feel that you'd like to hear from them about what kind of price they're going to offer you, then what you should ask them for is their best non-commissionable rate. Let me repeat that. You ask for the best non-commissionable rate, because in that simple statement, what you're showing is that you understand how the industry works, you understand the need to pay commissions to venue finding agencies and introducers when it's appropriate. You're making it clear that actually you're the client, so it's not appropriate to discuss commission. Therefore, you expect the price, the fee that you're going to be quoted to reflect the removal of a commission element. So simply asking that shows that you understand the industry we all work in, and it also shows that you mean business and that you're prepared to negotiate. So we're going to leave it there. That's pretty much it for the first module. What we've done is we've had a look at some very unique factors that plague this wonderful industry of ours, talked about some of the things that you need to consider and maybe a few phrases that you've wondered about and haven't been quite sure. There's a lot more to cover. We'll be doing it in a few more very easily digested lumps. I'm really looking forward to talking with you again soon. Thanks for your company. Bye for now.